Imagine a massive 1,500-acre wheat farm that has just been losing money for decades.
Right, just bleeding cash year after year.
Exactly. And suddenly, it is projected to generate upwards of 35 million pounds. But here's the crazy part. The owners, they aren't planting a single new cash crop.
No, not one.
Instead, they are bringing in heavy machinery, smashing up their own drainage pipes, letting the fields just be completely overrun by thistles, and handing the management of their river over to, I kid you not, a family of beavers.
It completely inverts everything we, assume about the economics of land. I mean, we are moving from a system that values a landscape based purely on what we can extract from it to one that assigns this massive financial value to the life we can actually return to it.
This is Better Side of the World, where we find good news from around the world. Introducing your favorite AI hosts, Delta and Tide.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. Today, we are tearing down the idea that saving the environment requires waiting for some multi-billion-dollar tech breakthrough or like a top-down global treaty.
Which is honestly so refreshing.
It really is. If you listening right now constantly feel bogged down by climate doom, we have a stack of sources today that act as the perfect antidote. We are pulling from the 2026 Earth Prize updates, a really fascinating Guardian piece on the financial mechanics of rewilding, and a bunch of ecological data from around the world.
And our mission today is to explore how the most radical, effective solutions are actually bubbling up from the ground level.
Right. We are talking about ingenious teenagers hacking local waste, a former poacher rewriting national policy, and farmers turning biodiversity into a high-yield asset.
The through line across all these sources is this profound shift in methodology. I mean, we are seeing hard evidence that ecosystems and, communities possess this staggering capacity to bounce back.
They don't need us to micromanage a new world into existence.
Exactly. They just need us to provide the right regional spark to trigger the healing process.
Let's start with that regional spark. I really want to focus on what is essentially a youth revolution in environmental engineering.
Oh, the Earth Prize stuff, yes.
Yeah. The 2026 Earth Prize. It's run by the Geneva-based Earth Foundation, which was actually born directly out of the 2019 global climate strikes.
Which is an interesting evolution right there.
Right. But reading through their updates, the tone has totally shifted from pure protest to this hyper-pragmatic innovation. And the prize is restricted entirely to teenagers, 13 to 19 years old.
That is just wild.
And what they're doing is solving global problems using incredibly low-cost, hyper-specific regional materials.
And that shift in philosophy is really what stands out here. I mean, the traditional global environmental movement often falls into this trap of trying to export, one-size-fits-all technology to every single corner of the planet.
Like dropping solar panels everywhere, regardless of context.
Right, exactly. But these teenagers are operating on the complete opposite logic. They are diagnosing a global crisis, sure, but they are solving it exclusively with the resources scattered in their own backyards.
The specifics are honestly mind-blowing. Take the winners from Africa. It's two 17-year-olds from Kenya who designed a vehicle exhaust filter.
Oh, this one is so clever.
It really is. Like, if a Silicon Valley startup tackled vehicle emissions, they would probably pitch some synthetic polymer filter that needs rare earth metals and millions in funding.
Oh, totally. With a massive carbon footprint just to manufacture it.
Right. But these two teenagers, they built theirs using maize, discarded batteries, coconut shells, and algae.
And to understand the brilliance of that, you really have to look at the chemistry and the regional context of Kenya.
Break that down for us.
Well, Kenya has a massive agricultural output, meaning things like maize stalks and coconut shells are incredibly abundant. And normally, they are just burned as agricultural waste.
Which just adds to the air pollution.
Exactly. But coconut shells, when you process them, they can create this highly porous activated carbon, which is actually exceptional at trapping particulate matter.
Oh, wow.
And then algae naturally absorbs carbon dioxide. So by combining these things, they created a living biological mesh.
That is so smart.
Right. They essentially looked at two hyperlocal problems, agricultural waste management and urban smog from older vehicles, and just smashed them together to cancel each other out.
It is resourceful in a way that feels almost like survivalist engineering. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like environmental MacGyvers.
That is the perfect way to describe it.
And you see that same kind of brutal pragmatism with the Middle East winners. Two sisters in Gaza developed a project to process war rubble into reusable building bricks.
Which is just heartbreaking, but also incredibly inspiring. The environment there is currently defined by destruction. So your conventional supply chains for things like cement or steel, they are either totally non-existent or highly restricted.
Right. You can't just order a truckload of bricks.
No. So the sisters recognize that the rubble itself is the only abundant resource they have. By developing a method to crush, bind, and cure the shattered concrete and stone into safe structural bricks, they aren't just recycling.
They're engineering a way to physically rebuild their future out of the wreckage of the present.
It brings a whole new gravity to the phrase circular economy.
It really does. And this hyper-regional approach is just as fascinating when applied to unseen pollution, like microplastics.
Oh, the team from India.
Yes, 3 16-year-olds in India.
Yeah.
They didn't try to build some massive, expensive ocean-sweeping net. They looked at the waste produced by their local food and agriculture sector and zeroed in on tamarind seeds.
Because again, it's something they already have in abundance.
Exactly. And they process these waste seeds into a powder that actually clumps microplastics together in water.
Yeah, the mechanism behind this is a process called coagulation. Tamarind seeds contain these specific natural biopolymers.
Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
So when you introduce this powder into contaminated water, the chemical structure of those polymers acts like a series of microscopic hooks.
Oh, I see.
They bind to the synthetic plastic particles, pulling them together into larger and larger masses until they are heavy enough to just sink to the bottom or be easily filtered out.
So it's like a molecular snowball rolling through the water, just gathering up all the invisible plastic debris.
That's exactly how it works.
And it cost next to nothing because the tamarind seeds were literally going to the landfill anyway.
Precisely the point. I mean, a high-tech chemical coagulant would have to be imported, paid for, shipped across the world.
Right.
But this solution utilizes an organic byproduct that is already deeply integrated into the Indian culinary and agricultural landscape. It's inherently scalable because the supply chain already exists.
Sticking with microplastics for a second, the European winner was an 18-year-old in Ireland named Arya. She invented a biodegradable plastic.
Which doesn't sound totally groundbreaking at first.
Right, but reading the breakdown of her project in the sources, she didn't just make a plastic that harmlessly disappears. She actually engineered it so that as it breaks down, it releases a specific enzyme that actively consumes the other existing microplastics surrounding it in the soil or water.
It represents a massive conceptual leap in material science.
How so?
Well, the historical goal for eco-friendly plastics has simply been, do less harm, just make it degrade faster.
Right, just disappear and stop being a problem.
Exactly. But this invention changes the material from being passive to being an active restorative agent. The plastic acts as a Trojan horse.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, it functions as standard packaging during its useful life, but once it begins to degrade in the environment, it deploys these biological Pac-Men that just chew through the ambient synthetic polymers left behind by previous generations of pollution.
That is brilliant. And we even see this localized, nature-first approach applied to reforestation. A 17-year-old in Thailand won for designing an innovative seed disperser.
Because planting trees by hand in some of these areas is nearly impossible, right?
Exactly. In steep, heavily deforested terrains, human planting is physically impossible. You have to drop seeds from the air. But normally, if you just drop them, they hit the hard ground, dry out, or just get eaten by birds.
So what did he do differently?
He used biomimicry. He studied how certain tree seeds have natural aerodynamic wings, kind of like those maple helicopters you see spinning to the ground.
Oh, yeah, the little whirligigs.
Right. So he engineered biodegradable aerodynamic casings loaded with nutrients and fungi, allowing aerial drones to drop them. They spin, plant themselves securely into the soil on impact, and basically carry their own starter fertilizer.
When you synthesize all these teenage inventions, a really clear paradigm emerges. We don't need a singular savior technology.
We don't need Iron Man to come save us.
No, true resilience comes from decentralized, highly contextualized innovation. We need millions of local actors utilizing local resources to solve localized iterations of global problems.
And that deep understanding of the local landscape, it isn't just a superpower for teenage inventors. It applies to human behavior and community knowledge, too. Which actually brings us to perhaps the most counterintuitive conservation story in our stack of sources today.
We are heading to São Tomé and Príncipe.
Right. Yes, moving from high school labs to this island nation, and a man named Manuel Gomes, known locally as Lindo. Lindo is a local fisher who recently helped shape his country's first ever marine protected areas.
But the crucial detail here is his background.
Yeah, he is a former sea turtle poacher.
His story perfectly illustrates the value of integrating historically marginalized or even illicit knowledge into environmental policy.
I have to pause you there, though, because my immediate reaction reading this part of the source material was just sheer skepticism. Putting a former poacher in charge of designing a marine reserve feels dangerously close to letting the fox design the henhouse. How do you trust that?
It is a completely natural reaction. I thought the same thing at first. But think about the practical realities of conservation for a second. Who possesses a more granular, intimate understanding of an ecosystem's vulnerabilities than the person whose entire livelihood depended on exploiting them?
I guess the fox knows exactly where the weak boards in the fence are.
Precisely. If top-down government scientists come in and draw arbitrary lines on a map to ban fishing, the local community, especially if they are facing starvation or severe poverty, will often just ignore the lines.
Right, because if you protect the turtles but destroy the local economy in the process, poaching just goes underground.
Exactly. What Lindo provided was the vital, localized insight required to find a viable balance. He helped design the Santana and Ilha das Rolas marine protected areas to shield critical breeding habitats, while intentionally leaving specific corridors open for small-scale, sustainable fishing.
So she transformed exploitative knowledge into protective knowledge.
He did, and the guiding philosophy he shared in the interviews is quite striking. He said, habitats that have been destroyed will regenerate.
It's an incredibly optimistic statement. But according to the ecological data in our sources, it's not just blind hope. It's actually the biological default.
The data strongly supports it. A prime example is the global tracking of mangrove forests.
Yeah, let's talk about the mangroves.
For decades, the narrative around mangroves was just pure devastation. Between the 1980s and 2010, the world lost over 12,000 square kilometers of mangroves to coastal development and commercial shrimp farming.
But the satellite data post-2010 reveals a massive plot twist. We are now gaining more mangroves globally than we are losing.
And the sources point out that this isn't because humans organized some massive multi-billion-dollar global tree planting campaign.
No, the trees are doing it themselves.
Mangroves are uniquely adapted to reclaim territory. They drop propagules, which are essentially these self-contained seedling pods, and they just float on the tide until they hit a mud bank and take root.
So as long as coastal communities stop actively bulldozing them and ensure the natural tidal hydrology isn't blocked by seawalls, the mangroves will aggressively replant themselves.
Exactly. You just have to step out of their way.
We see that exact same dynamic with the vulture populations in South Asia. This was an absolute ecological crisis.
A catastrophic one, yeah.
Across northern India, the white-rumped vulture population crashed by 99.9%. They were functionally extinct.
And it turned out they were being inadvertently poisoned by diclofenac, which is an anti-inflammatory drug given to cattle.
Right. When the cattle died, the vultures acted as the natural cleanup crew, ingesting the meat. But the drug is highly toxic to their kidneys, causing rapid renal failure.
So the governments of India, Nepal, and Pakistan actually stepped in and banned the veterinary use of diclofenac.
And the result, 2 decades later, is what the RSPB calls one of the greatest conservation success stories of our time.
The numbers are just steadily climbing back up.
Yeah. They didn't have to capture the remaining birds and build complex breeding facilities across the subcontinent. They simply identified the chemical bottleneck, removed it, and let the species do what it naturally wants to do.
Survive and multiply. It perfectly mirrors Lindo's philosophy in the marine reserve. Whether you are dealing with a coastline, a bird of prey, or a coral reef, the most effective intervention is often just removing the stressor.
But let's introduce some friction here. Because teenage inventors, reformed poachers, hands-off conservation, these are fantastic concepts.
They are.
But transitioning these ideas from a local beach or a high school lab to a national scale requires serious, undeniable capital. How do we make stepping back and letting nature heal financially competitive in a capitalist system?
That is the million-dollar question, or, well, the 35 million pound question in this case. You have to follow the money. If a standing forest is worth less than the timber it provides, the forest will inevitably fall.
Right.
To scale rewilding, the healing process itself has to become profitable.
Which brings us back to that Guardian long read about the Boothby Wildland Project in Lincolnshire, England. This was a 1,525-acre expanse of intensive, highly managed farmland growing wheat and beans.
A very traditional agricultural setup.
Very. And a company called Nattergall, led by Sir Charles Burrell, purchased the estate, and they initiated a process that utterly shocked the neighboring agricultural community.
They halted operations entirely.
Completely. No seeds planted, no fertilizer, no herbicides. They actually brought in heavy machinery to smash the underground drainage pipes that generations of farmers had painstakingly laid out to keep the soil dry and arable.
They deliberately broke the farm.
To the traditional eye, it looks like absolute madness. But Nadergal's underlying thesis is that nature can become an investable asset class.
Historically, the only economic mechanism for that land was extraction, forcing poor soil to yield crops, which frankly was actually losing money if you factored out government subsidies.
Wow, so it wasn't even profitable as a farm.
Not without help. So Boothby is pioneering a model where they basically farm wildlife instead of wheat.
Okay, explain the math on that, because how do you deposit a revitalized wetland into a bank account?
It all hinges on a relatively new legal framework in the UK called Biodiversity Net Gain, or BNG.
BNG. Good.
Under this law, if a developer builds a new housing subdivision or a highway and degrades a local habitat, they are legally obligated to not just replace what they destroyed, but to create a 10% overall increase in nature.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second here, because I know what you listening at home are thinking. Isn't this just a massive corporate loophole? Like, a developer pays over a rare meadow, writes a check to Boothby Wildland 100 miles away, and gets a clear conscience while the local environment still gets destroyed.
It is the most common critique of the system, and it's a really vital one to consider. To prevent it from becoming a greenwashing loophole, the BNG framework relies on incredibly rigorous, legally binding ecological audits.
So they can't just throw home yet and walk away.
Right. Developers are highly incentivized to keep the habitat restoration on their own site if possible. But when a condo building simply cannot support a thriving wetland on its footprint, they purchase BNG credits from a site like Boothby.
I see.
Crucially, the baseline of the degraded land is measured down to the millimeter. Boothby can only generate a credit if they can scientifically prove they have elevated the biodiversity of their soil far beyond its baseline state.
And when they prove it, the payout is astronomical. The sources indicate these BNG units can sell for up to 25,000 pounds apiece.
Which is staggering.
Boothby is aiming to generate over 1,400 units. We're looking at a former struggling wheat field generating an estimated 35 million pounds just in biodiversity credits.
And that's not even their only revenue stream.
Right. Add to that a £1 million deal they already signed with the engineering firm Arup for carbon credits, paying Boothby simply for the carbon pulled out of the air by the returning scrub and trees.
It fundamentally rewires the financial incentive structure of land ownership.
But we have to look at the human cost of this transition, because the friction in the local community is palpable. The Guardian piece interviewed neighboring farmers, and they are grieving.
And we cannot dismiss that anger.
No, absolutely not. One neighbor noted that this land had been cultivated for 1,000 years. Generations of backbreaking labor to feed the country wiped out in 4 years. Her exact quote was, "You can't eat butterflies."
From a food security perspective and a cultural perspective, transitioning farmland to wildland is deeply jarring. Visually, it looks like neglect.
Right.
When you stop spraying herbicides, the ecosystem doesn't instantly look like a pristine national park. The first things to emerge are aggressive pioneer species.
The locals are furious about what they call the weed phase. Massive, unruly fields of thistles, ragwort, and docks, with the seeds blowing over onto their carefully manicured crops.
It is a messy transition.
It reminds me of watching an ugly home renovation. You know, the neighbors look at the property and all they see are dumpsters, dust, and torn-up drywall. They're complaining about the mess because they don't understand that the scaffolding has to go up before the new house can be built.
That is a great way to look at it. The thistles and ragwort are exactly that. They are ecological scaffolding. Their deep roots break up the compacted agricultural soil, and they provide the initial nectar for returning insects.
But the renovation isn't finished yet. And the contractors Nadergal is bringing in to complete the job are the real wild cards.
The beavers.
The beavers. Slated to arrive in 2026.
Yes. Instead of paying millions for excavators to dig out ponds and restore the historical meanders of the river, they are literally unleashing a family of beavers to do the terraforming for free.
Nature's civil engineers.
And the ancillary benefits they provide are staggering. Beavers build dams which dramatically slow the flow of water. During winter storms, this prevents catastrophic downstream flooding.
And during summer droughts, it acts as a reservoir, keeping water on the land.
Exactly.
We actually saw this in an urban environment recently. The sources highlight the Greenford Tube Station in London, which historically flooded during heavy rains. In 2023, they reintroduced beavers nearby. The beavers built a dam, created a retention pond, and the flooding at the train station ceased entirely.
Beyond infrastructure protection, they are elite carbon capture engines. A landmark study from the University of Birmingham examined a beaver wetland in Switzerland over a 13-year period.
What did they find?
They discovered that the sediment trapped behind the beaver dams stored up to 14 times more carbon than the adjacent forest soils.
Wait, 14 times? How does a pond store more carbon than a literal forest?
It comes down to oxygen. When organic matter like leaves, twigs, dead plants falls onto a forest floor, it decomposes relatively quickly in the oxygen-rich air, releasing its carbon back into the atmosphere.
Okay.
But the deep mud behind a beaver dam creates an anaerobic environment. There is almost no oxygen. So when organic matter gets trapped in that silt, the decomposition process slows to a crawl.
So it just locks the carbon securely in the mud for decades, if not centuries.
Precisely, 14 times the carbon storage, just by letting a giant rodent do its daily routine.
It really pulls everything we've discussed today into focus.
Yeah.
Whether it is a teenager in Ireland engineering a plastic-eating enzyme, a former poacher carving out safe zones on a coastline, or beavers rebuilding a river in Lincolnshire, the most robust solutions share the exact same DNA.
They rely on local knowledge, and they require us to step back and let the experts, whether they are human or biological, do the heavy lifting.
We have spent the last century operating under this illusion that we need to aggressively micromanage the planet to save it.
What the data suggests is that we actually just need to design the right conditions for the planet to save itself.
So, as you listening go about your week, keep that paradigm in mind. We started this deep dive by looking at Gen Z innovators, turning literal trash into global filtration systems. We watched a poacher become the ultimate protector of marine life. And we mapped out how a 1,000-year-old farm is reverting to a wildly profitable wetland simply by breaking its own drainage pipes.
The scale of the climate crisis is undeniable, but today's sources prove that the solutions don't have to be impossibly high-tech.
And they certainly don't require waiting for permission from the top. Nature's default state is to regenerate, provided we just give it the room and the right localized spark.
And that leaves us with a fascinating parallel to consider in our own lives. If a 16-year-old can unravel the microplastic crisis using waste tamarind seeds, and an exhausted, depleted patch of dirt can explode with life and multi-million-pound profit in just 4 years, what is a deeply entrenched, supposedly rumen system in your own life, your workplace, or your community?
Yeah.
One that isn't actually dead, but is simply waiting for you to introduce the right unconventional spark to trigger its regeneration.
This has been Better Side of the World. And somewhere tonight, something good is still happening.